Great. So thank you, everybody. And then again on the phone, we have Cecily, Lee, Susan, Brooke, and Lori Hogan. So again, a good group of folks that sort of represents senior centers from across the county. And then just for everyone to know, we are filming this information session, our bidders conference. So it's both being broadcast live. So Cheryl in the back, you'll have to keep your comments to a publicly accessible zone. And then, which we've already had one violation of today. And then also we'll be taking the recording in its totality, in its entirety, and then posting it on the website for King County, and if we can, through Zoom grants as well. And the purpose of that is, as a bidders conference with the actual RFQ that's now currently open, our responsibility is to make sure that any interested party has equal access to the information. So we'll answer questions directly as we can here, and in some cases we're also going to sort of digest that question and then translate it into a frequently asked question that we'll use to update the FAQ document that's attached to the Zoom grants application right now. So any questions on that before we get going? Great. So the first thing, thank you for coming. First thing. The second thing to do is just by way of quick introduction in case you don't know who we are. Leo Flor. So I work inside of King County's Community Services Division, and I get to work with our programs for aging and seniors, for veterans, and then for what we call vulnerable populations, but it's really a sort of collection of programs for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, immigrants and refugees, survivors of commercial sexual exploitation, persons with disabilities, and a couple of other groups as well. And then
Marcy Kubbs, I'm managing the King County Older Adult and Aging Program. Marcy Kubbs, I'm managing the King County Older Adults and Aging Program.
And then we've got
Adam Schmid. I work with the levy and am running the technology for today.
All right. And Adam is undercutting himself a little bit. He is division. He manages all of our processes around making sure that we're partnering well with folks in the community. So Adam is a person. Adam and Marcy are really the two primary folks that somebody in this room would hear from directly in the context of communications about this RFQ, but also about what the division is doing generally. All right, so if we could jump to the next slide. And for the folks on the phone, I know that it can be hard to ask a question sometimes, so just fearlessly interrupt and break in whenever you have a question, and we'll be happy to pause and make sure we're able to get that question, and then we'll do our best to repeat questions we get in the room out loud so that you can hear them before we answer them. So really quickly, folks who have been to previous information centers before the actual opening, we're not going to retread all of that ground, but I think one thing just to really point out, and this gets a little bit to one of the comments and introductions, is that the Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services Levy is going to fund or provide funds into the community through two plans. The first of those plans we call the transition plan, and it has already been enacted and has force of law. And that's the plan that we're operating under for this RFQ. And its time duration is 1 year, and it's 2018. There is a second plan that is currently before our county council, and that plan, which we call the implementation plan, is going to govern all levy expenditures from 2019 through 2023. So a 6-year levy, first year in one plan, last 5 years in the second plan. The reason it's broken up that way was just that in order to be able to get money out into the community quickly after the levy passed last November, we needed a sort of transitional plan in place to cover this first year. And the reason to just go through all of that is it corresponds to two sets of investments in senior centers. And you see this word potential underlined on the slide, or if you don't, it is underlined on the slide. And the bottom line on this is we know for sure that that transition plan, already enacted force of law, says that King County shall disperse up to $3.7 million to support senior centers in King County. And that's the subject of this RFQ. but the time duration is limited to 2018, which is why a lot of the types of investment that we'll talk about today are ones that are really geared towards sort of one-time or non-sustaining investments, and that's a theme that you've heard in previous meetings. And then there is a forthcoming set of investments, we think, and we have a reasonable expectation that some form of those investments will come forward. That would be for the last 5 years of the levy. The way that the executive has proposed that to the council is that for in each year from 2019 through 2023, there would be at least an additional $3.7 million per year, and it actually climbs a little bit towards the end of the levy period. And the only reason to go through all that is we can't tell you right now for sure what the council will ultimately approve on that plan. And so in many ways, this is coming from the transition plan for this RFQ, and it's a transitional investment in many ways for King County to go from less than $150,000 total per year in senior center investments to almost $4 million a year. And this year is our transitional year for that. So the nature of the types of things that we are seeking responses for in this RFQ is different than what we would seek responses for in this subsequent plan. And timing-wise, just to say it, we expect that RFP or RFQ, depending on what form it takes, would be out in the community late this year, potentially early next year, but I think we're aiming for late this year. So any questions just on that piece of it? The last thing to say here before we get to what I think folks are really more interested in, which is the contents of the RFQ itself, is that these words of stabilize and transform, and it kind of gets to this one-time type of investment versus ongoing investments. So what we're trying to do in King County is support what we've really heard loud and clear from senior center directors themselves, which is that the senior centers can do so much right now and could do so much more if they just had the resources, if you all just had the resources. And so these first year investments are really intended to literally try to stabilize some parts of programs that are not stable. So that might actually be literal in terms of you might have a part of your building that's actually not stable, and perhaps that's a minor capital expenditure that's eligible under the second category of expenditures in this levy. Or it might be that you have staff and you're actually not really sure if you're going to be able to provide for them for the remainder of this year, and we can help stabilize for at least the remainder of this year. It might be a number of things that we're going to talk about, but all of these are really intended to sort of give this one-time investment that stabilizes. And then the long-term vision is to help senior center directors really be able to achieve what you all have articulated in many different ways, which is that given some support, you can reach more people, more types of people, provide more services, more types of services, and really become those centralized hubs that we're really hoping to support you all in becoming in the communities. And so if we can click, I think one more thing will show up on the slide here. This is the very last piece of it, is we really see senior centers as hubs, as places where people meet each other and gain that social connection that fights isolation, that we know is essential to help seniors living well and living as long as they can. And I think from our perspective, to really get more deliberate about connecting programs. So when we fund other programs with this levy, the vision is absolutely that the senior centers that we work with in King County become the conduit through which those programs can become accessible to the seniors that you all serve. So connecting seniors to each other, bringing more of them into the senior centers, becoming more representative where that's appropriate or necessary, and then being able to layer in services so that a senior center can say to that person who comes in and doesn't maybe necessarily want food, but is saying, hey, I got evicted, there was a Crosscut article about this, and that the senior centers are able to say, well, these are the senior-specific eviction support resources that are available funded at least through this levy. So really positioning senior centers as hubs. All right. Okay, so the next question is, what is a senior center? We've been talking about this a lot with many of you in many different contexts, but the RFQ now has a definition of senior center. What we've done is sort of put it into its essential elements up here, and I can review those. And then the question that might come is somebody might say, here, am I a senior center? And just to preview the form of that response, the form of the response that we're going to give in a meeting here now is, these are the elements that an applicant must meet through the contents of their application, so that a review panel made up of folks from the community assesses, bless you, my sneezes are way louder, so that a review panel can take a look at the contents of your application, and then make that judgment. So there are elements essentially that an application must satisfy, and then a panel will review applications and see whether a particular application meets this definition. So the first part of the eligibility requirements of what is a senior center, there are sort of three broad categories. So the first one is self-identified and recognized in the community as a senior center. The Vashon Senior Center is an example of a senior center that has senior center in its name, appears to be known in the community as a senior center. So that might be something to include in one's application that would satisfy a requirement like that. Community center with significant senior focused programming. So that's language that was derived directly from the transition plan, the ordinance that directs this RFQ. And so what that, it's got its own words, but if you are not a quote unquote senior center, this is another way to make a showing that we are a community center and we have significant senior focused programming. And then the third is a specific senior program or organization that oversees the delivery of older Americans, or an organization that oversees the delivery of older Americans Act-funded nutrition services at multiple senior centers. There's a comma in there, that's all I just want to point out. And that comma separates two clauses within that part of the definition so that they are distinct. And now, if you are any of those three, there is a requirement that you must operate qualifying senior services or qualifying services for seniors 3 days a week for a minimum of 15 hours a week. And then it says what those are, or examples of them. This is not you must do all of them. It's that you must provide, I think an array is the word that the definition in the actual RFQ uses. The definition in the actual RFQ is the source document. So again, this is a summary, and this is not the binding language. But that's the sort of baseline definition that we have here. One of those three sort of types of organization or entity, and then a minimum time requirement. Now, the purpose of this conference is really to answer your questions. So I think this is a good place to stop. Does anyone have a question about the definition of senior center to become eligible or to satisfy eligibility for this RFQ? Anybody on the phone have a question? All right. Okay, so one of the other things that folks who have been into the RFQ will have noticed is that there is mention of a small nutrition site. And this is actually a sort of list of formally recognized entities that may or may not satisfy the definition of senior center themselves. So we're not predetermining that. Any organization, again, can apply and make that showing of whether or not they think that they are a senior center. But there are some organizations that we anticipate will not satisfy that definition, and the primary variable by which they may not satisfy that definition is going to be the number of days or number of hours per week in operation. But some of those still exist in a very specific list that we've included as attachment 6 within the RFQ, and those are what we're calling small nutrition sites. And the only reason to highlight that is that for a small nutrition site that is not yet that is not a senior center under this definition, there is an opportunity through something we've called an inclusion incentive to be able to provide some funding. And I think this is responsive to one of the comments that attendee made, which is that we might have some organizations that are sort of on a pathway to becoming a quote unquote senior center. And this might be a way to sort of assist in forming a partnership that supports that type of development. Again, understanding that this is a pretty quick investment in 2018, and that there is a different set of investments potentially coming in 2019 through 2023. So any questions about this piece? So the thing to point out here is that this is less about did somebody make a showing that satisfies the elements, and there's just literally a list, and it lists what they are, and you can't be one if you're not on the list. Next slide, please. All right. So if you look at this RFQ, there are really sort of two gates that are there. One is, are you a senior center under the definition of senior center? And then the next is, do you propose eligible uses of funds through the RFQ? And then the detail there is, does a panel in rating your application assess that you meet at least 50% of the available points in each of those categories? So I want to spend a little bit of time on these categories. Maybe this is where a lot of the questions are. And this, if you were at a previous meeting, this is the same as that sort of 4 flavors of ice cream metaphor or analogy that we were using. This RFQ contemplates that an application can seek funds in up to 4 investment areas. One of them is mandatory, and that's the first one, and that there is no minimum amount of proposed expenditure in that mandatory amount. So you got to have a little bit of that flavor of ice cream at least. You could have all that flavor of ice cream. In other words, you could have all category 1. Or you could choose to combine requests in the other 3 categories or areas of investment. So I'll just go through those here. Increased participation and diversity. And in the language on the RFQ, you'll actually see the use of the word inclusion. And I just want to actually recognize that we got some good feedback at this last session. I believe it was from Lee, really pointing out that diversity is a good thing, but inclusion is also part of the equation. And so that's a change that we made based on feedback from the senior center director. And the idea here is that we're trying to just recognize the fact that in our community, seniors in general are an underserved population, and yet there are populations within the senior population where there are just really stark discrepancies or disparities in terms of outcomes like life expectancy, health, experience of things like isolation. There's a lot of sort of subpopulations or factors that affect particular people. Many of those are racial or ethnic categories. There might be status as an LGBTQ senior. It might be status as somebody who does not speak English as their primary language. I think there are a number of axes on which inclusion becomes important. And so what we've done in this category is to say that any application must contain at least some proposed expenditure that would promote the increase of participation, diversity, and inclusion for folks who use the senior center. And the rationale there, just to get into it, is we're talking about centering senior centers as hubs with long-term investments to build up their ability to provide access to other levy-funded programs. And so one of the things that we really feel like is important to do that is to make sure we're getting as many seniors as possible through and into the senior centers, while also recognizing that the senior centers themselves, yourselves, need more support to be able to handle that flow or that increase of attendance. So any questions on that first category? Susan.
Yeah, so increased participation and diversity. You could either go at it directly, right? I'm going to market to all these groups, or you could go at it indirectly, right? Which is you're going to get an inclusion consultant, and we're going to work on this and don't know exactly where that's going to go because we're starting a process. Or it could even be a slightly more indirect in that it's still through a consultant, but we haven't got a cultural competency plan. Are those all legit expensive under this? Because having a cultural competency plan may not necessarily lead to increase in participation.
So I'm going to give a lawyer's answer. Thank you, Adam. So just to repeat the question, Susan asked, with a couple of specific examples, of whether these would be eligible types of expenditure. So she mentioned some things that would be direct efforts to increase diversity or inclusion. And then I think the question is really, there are some other things that Susan described as indirect attempts to, and an example there was a cultural competency plan. So the answer is going to be a lawyer's answer, but all of what you described, I think, sounds consistent with the purpose, and the thing that any applicant has to do is to include within their application a description of programs that describes how they will achieve this and by what mechanism and how much that would cost. So I think just practically a less persuasive or effective or satisfactory answer there is we're going to have an inclusion plan, and I think a more informed answer or effective answer is we recognize this particular disparity or underrepresentation of this population. We would seek to increase that by doing this, and we believe that doing that will cost this. So it's sort of making sure to tie a response to the thing that's actually being asked for there. Inclusion incentives. So this is one of the eligible types of thing that a senior center might seek funding for under that first category. And we didn't talk about this before, and in many ways this is actually sort of an outgrowth of some feedback we've received from several different people, and it also incorporates the comments that Lee had shared previously, that authenticity of partnerships is important. And a lot of folks have said, you know, you could cynically propose and what could be an eligible use of the funds that someone might not think would be actually that effective. Like, you know, we're going to have this particular event and call it a diversity event, and that's how we're going to satisfy the requirements and no more. But we actually don't think that that could do anything. And so what we're trying to promote and allow senior centers and small nutrition sites to do through the inclusion incentive piece is to say that there are additional funds available for those two organizations to use to partner, and the funds are really there to fund the partnership, to fund the relationship building. So an example, if there was small nutrition site A and senior center B, and small nutrition site A is focused on a cultural community that the senior center just recognizes it doesn't do a good enough job of, or could do a better job of including, then rather than saying, well, senior center, you know, hold an event that's specifically, you know, tailored to appeal to the folks that small nutrition site works with, let's actually try to fund a relationship that can become something that's more ongoing, more authentic, more permanent. And the idea there is that we actually don't know what that might look like. And so we are able to provide some financial means by which to meaningfully promote that partnership. But it's kind of a thing where a senior center and a small nutrition site are going to have to sort of think about what that would look like themselves. Now, just to talk about the money piece of this, the way that the RFQ is structured is that any application that contains one or more of these inclusion incentives, the funding for that inclusion incentive, which totals $15,000, is additive to anything else that's requested within the application. So that is an additional $15,000. And what you may have noticed within the RFQ, the way it's structured, is that the disbursement of those funds between the two entities is up to $5,001 for the senior center and up to $9,999 for the small nutrition site. Dagmar.
Is it possible for a small nutrition site to be submitting a proposal and still be in the incentive program for a larger organization?
So Dagmar answered or asked the question, is it possible for a small nutrition site to submit an application as a senior center, I assume, but also to be a small nutrition site that partners with another senior center? So there is nothing in the application that bars that, just to say that. And yeah, there's nothing in the application that bars that I'm aware of. I think that's one where we can get a more refined answer and provide it out to the group. But there's nothing in the application that is currently written that bars that. That's another lawyer's answer. You can score it on. Jeannie.
So the partnerships that you're talking about are limited to partners that are also eligible for this RFQ as you've described it, not other. I mean, you said small nutrition sites, which are people that are eligible, but if it was like a different kind of senior service that you, or somebody that would provide something that you wanted to partner with to include your diversity.
So just to restate what I understand Jeannie's question to be, she's confirming whether or not a small nutrition site listed in attachment 60 to the RFQ could or could not propose to partner with something that is not a senior center that is applying for the main RFQ itself. And to see if it answers the question, the RFQ, the only people who are eligible to make an application to the RFQ are the senior centers. And then an eligible senior center may, in a sort of derivative way, partner with one or more small nutrition sites through the inclusion incentives. But a small nutrition site could not propose and apply on its own to partner with a quote-unquote senior center that had not applied. If that answers your question, Jeannie.
I think so. I think I misunderstood something. Thank you.
So it is a senior center RFQ, and then the senior center may propose additional partnerships. Please.
But a partnership, I think, to add to, could be an entity that serves people over 55, but has really no other kind of umbrella associated with the senior center. For example, on Vashon, we have some community groups, community associations. They tend to be almost all older people. Gold Beach Community Center would be something that could be a partner with us. The South End Community Club could be a partner. It's more of a homeowners association or an informal club. And would that then be something that you would consider as a partner?
I don't believe they're going to be found on attachment 6, which is a list of
So the
existing
answer is, okay.
aging and disability services, older American Act nutrition.
They have to be on that. Okay, thanks.
And for folks on the phone, that question was basically, could a senior center apply for an inclusion incentive with a small group or nutrition site that's not listed on attachment 6 on the RFQ? And the answer is no. Kevin, did you have a question?
I think that answers that. I thought I heard the question of being, could a larger senior citizen organization partner with an organization that serves seniors but wasn't necessarily nutrition? So I think that.
Any other questions? Oh, does somebody on the phone have a question? Other questions on the we want to make sure that the folks have a good understanding of this and the possible combinations and the not possible combinations there. All right. So and within the RFQ, there's a list of examples of types of expenditures that would be eligible under that first category or area of investment. And just to be clear, that list is illustrative as opposed to exhaustive. So it's not that you must do one of these things, it's that these are examples of types of thing that correspond to that flavor of ice cream, to continue that analogy, but you could think of something else. So as Susan mentioned, you could think of perhaps a cultural competency plan, and just depending on how well it was represented within the application, that could satisfy the category. Kevin?
Just stepping back to the previous one, so that list that you talked about is actually this list. I just wanted to know that that all the other attachments do have attachment 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. This one is attachment 6, but there's nowhere on the document that says that it's actually.
Thank you.
is that part of the handout today, or was that, it's found on the RFQ? Okay.
All right, so the second category, update organizational infrastructure, and just to hit them all at a high level first. So increase participation and inclusion, update organizational infrastructure, improve the facility through minor capital investments, and then maintain or enhance programming is the way it's described within the RFQ. Mark, do you have a question?
Under update organizational infrastructure, you've got some equipment, minor capital investments. I would consider a refrigerator equipment. What's the difference between equipment and capital?
So it's a good question, and I think the threshold response is that it's, so thank you, Adam. The question is, Mark points out that a refrigerator is something that I think you can describe as capital. But it could, does that fit in that category 2 or does that fit in category 3? And I think that the answer is it could fit in either of them, depending on how you described it. And it would be okay to show up in either of them, depending on how you described it. But maybe the way that we describe category 2 versus category 3 can help there. And I think the purpose of the categories is possibly helpful here. So the way that it's listed within the RFQ, the second category of improve or update organizational infrastructure is really about how do you, as an organization, sort of update some of the systems or equipment that you need to operate as effectively as you would like to operate. And that might be the capacity of the people in the organization. It might be a refrigerator if you characterized it appropriately. It might be computers. And I do want to spend just a point of emphasis here. The RFQ does list a set of data that we are trying to be very clear about. We will work with awardees to collect that data. We have made, this is another thing, Susan pointed this out at the last meeting, there was an error in the way we were trying to calculate veterans versus family members. We've taken that in, and the new version of the spreadsheet shows a differentiation there. So the reason I go through that is this isn't the final list. We will negotiate this as we get into the award and contracting process for folks who are awarded. But it's pretty close to the final list. And as you take a look at that and you consider an application and you say, we don't have the data system to do that, or we don't have the expertise to do that, this is a category in which that type of support or device could be an eligible expenditure. So I just want to emphasize just loud and clear over and over again, one of the very clear things that we've heard from senior centers from the very beginning is that you ask all this stuff from us and then you don't give us any means to answer the questions. This can provide the means to answer the questions. And I cannot say whether or not a future RFP, if there is one, will provide the means to answer the questions. This can provide the means to answer the questions in terms of equipment, in terms of capacity, in terms of a system. This can provide the means to answer the question. So, there's Kevin.
This is somewhat related, and then also related to the other one about partnership, right? So, if an organization wanted to partner with one of the nutrition sites, could the funding available be used between both organizations in addition to the other $15,000 incentive?
I don't think that there's anything in the, so the question is, could, if I understand the question correctly, basically if you make an application that includes an inclusion incentive, and that's that $15,000 distribution that we talked about, a $5,001 versus $9,999. Could the senior center in its application propose to use additional money to fund that partnership with the site? I don't think that there's anything that prohibits that inside of the application. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that prohibits that. We will be looking at that through the lens of sort of fiscal oversight. And I think the thing that's important is that the money is going to flow from King County to the senior center. And so outside of the context of one of those inclusion incentives, any type of thing that you're describing would require a sort of process that the senior center itself administered to make that happen. But I don't think that there's anything that would bar that in the application. I don't know, Marcy, if you see that a different way.
No, I think that makes sense. Details would probably have to be worked out in contract negotiation. And award was successful.
So if that second flavor of ice cream, if you will, or that second category is about improving the sort of organizational infrastructure of the senior center, this next one is about the facility. So the actual place from which operations occur. And can you maintain or enhance, I think are the two verbs that are included in the RFQ, the facility through repairs, maintenance, or minor capital expenditures. And there's a list in there of what those types of things are. But again, just to sort of highlight it, maintenance. So there might be deferred maintenance on something like an elevator that can promote ADA accessibility. That might be something that somebody could describe in a satisfactory way within their application. There might be other deferred maintenance on a facility that enhances or maintains that facility's ability to host safely in an inclusive way folks who come into the facility. There might be a small capital project, and then this is where you see a limit on capital contributions of $49,999. Just to say the reason why I think Marcy came to a really smart decision here, where there are other fund sources that can support larger capital expenditures. And frankly, there are other sort of contracting management setups that are more appropriate to manage large capital infrastructure projects or capital projects. And so what we're trying to do here is identify relatively minor capital projects that will not exceed that cost, or as a question was asked previously, you could theoretically propose how you would combine this funding with another capital source to fund a larger project, but pay attention to the period of performance. Pay attention to the RFQ's period of performance there. And then there's also, yes, we got something on the phone.
This is Lee. So the total is under 50,000 for everything combined in that category. Is that correct?
No. The total is that 49,000 is for the project, correct?
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you.
So a senior center might, for example, say within this category of minor capital investments to enhance or maintain a facility, $30,000 for a minor capital project, and then $20,000 for facility repairs that are not a capital project, or additional $5 for that. But the 49 is just for the capital project.
Okay, thank you. But if you had little capital projects,
I think,
are you wanting to cap that category at 50?
I think the way that it reads is per capital project. So if the question is, could you theoretically have, 100 $10 capital projects, or something that equals more than $50,000, which I think is the question that Lee's presenting, you could have more than $50,000 worth of capital projects as long as no capital project in and of itself was more than $49,999.
We may need to do a little research on that, whether it's per agency. I'm not sure.
So we'll refine it. I don't think the RFQ's terms are responsive to that particular question, so that's probably an update. But again, this is a period of performance question. How many capital projects are going to come through and be successful in a senior center? But I think we owe an answer to that specific question of whether you could combine a series of capital projects, all of which were individually less than $49,000, but the sum of which exceeded $49,000. So in some ways, the question is, can you have multiple capital projects? And we'll get an answer to that.
I have a quick question about the contractor, the licensed and bonded contractor. We're kind of in the planning stage where we would not, by December 31st, be able to implement our capital project, but we need to plan. And to do that, we need a civil engineer to do that planning, who wouldn't be a licensed and bonded contractor. Is that okay? Would be a licensed civil engineer. And I can tell you specifically, we need to know the integrity of our sewer line.
So if the question is, can a senior center apply for funding to do some type of work, planning work that is not the capital project itself,
Correct.
but
Would lead to
would be characterized as being responding to one of these four?
phase one of a minor capital project where you're doing the planning, because you don't know what the solution is yet.
So I think the controlling answer here is you can propose anything you want, and an application must make a showing on the criteria contained within the RFQ of whether or not that is going to satisfy or comport with one of these categories. What we'll take a look at is if there is a specific answer we could provide to that we could put out in an updated frequently asked questions, if there's a way to provide some clarity to that. But I mean, if questions are, could I do this? I mean, we're going to give essentially the same answer to all of those, which is that an applicant must make a showing of how what they propose is likely to satisfy the criteria contained within the RFQ. Kevin.
If I could, if I would put on my general contracting hat, right, just as a frame of reference that may be helpful, I would say that if you know that there's an issue with the sewer line, right, then you could engage a general contractor who would be licensed and bonded and all of that to determine if, yes, there is a problem, and then what the process would be to remedy that problem, right? Which a part of that process would then be to get a civil engineer to determine, but the general contractor could bid out that entire project, and you could have that to then be included.
If we knew what the project was, we would do that. We just don't know what the project is until we know where the line is. So we don't know what the solution is at this moment.
Well, so, and again, I think the important thing to, again, the possibilities are sort of infinite.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, what the county has to do is to demonstrate and assess whether or not a particular application satisfies the requirements laid out in the RFQ. And so, we had a conversation about pool tables at a previous meeting, and just for folks who haven't been there, the application matters. The way you describe something in an application, which must be accurate and in good faith, matters. And so we're going to do this, period, is different than we're going to do this because, where what comes after the because is some sort of statement that addresses the criteria that are contained within the RFQ. So that's an indirect answer and perhaps not satisfying in the particular instance. And like I said, we will see if we can clarify something in an RFQ in a helpful way. But if you didn't see any update to the RFQ, you know the equation that we're going to apply to any of these. So one more category, but any questions on these two? Mark, did I answer your initial question about?
That's what I was looking for, say, capital project, or equipment is $5,000 and under, capital is $5,000 and over, which is how we do it for our county.
There is no delineation within RFQ like that. And again, in some ways it might not matter where you put it as long as what you propose responds to the place where you put it, if that makes sense. Sir.
So, KWA has a small nutrition site, according to Amendment 6. We also do have other programs that's defined as a senior center. So, if we do collaboration within us, we fall under that incentive category.
So the question is with it's specific to Korean Women's Association, but I think I can generalize the question, which is that if you are both one of the listed small nutrition sites on attachment 6 and you believe that your entity can satisfy that you are a senior center, I think intent-wise, to the extent that the intent is to create partnerships that improve inclusion and diversity of the senior center, I don't really think that that falls within that. I would certainly, again, if someone gets to describe on their application what they want to describe, but that to me would be a case of, you have to write a partnership letter, and it'd basically be like, Leo agrees that Leo is going to do this. And so I think that might be outside of it's creative though.
I have to ask.
So Dagmar.
Well, we keep coming back to the incentive partnership, so I just wanted to mention that I had a printed copy of the list, and I'm passing it down.
Thank you, Dagmar. So Dagmar.
The people on the
Dagmar was just mentioning that she's passing around a copy of attachment 6, which Kevin has pointed out does not say attachment 6 on it. If somebody on the phone or on the internet wanted to see it, you can go into the RFQ. It is, and attachment 6 is there, although you'll probably see an update based on Kevin's eagle eye there. One of the technical assistants, so he pays attention to detail, although I'm not advocating for any particular technical assistant. All right, the last category, we've sort of digested it up here, but please pay attention to how it's worded inside of the document, where it is maintain or enhance programming. And so this is a clarification based on some feedback that we received before the RFQ went out, where some of the questions were, I hear what you're saying, that this is one-time investment and we shouldn't propose to set up a bunch of new ongoing expenses that we can't guarantee how they're going to be funded beyond this relatively short period of performance. But what about, I'm out of money and I want to keep my social worker with me for at least another 6 months? So we wanted to clarify that it would be an eligible proposed use of funds to maintain a senior center's capacity. That is an eligible proposed use of funds.
And to enhance it, right?
It is also an eligible proposed use to enhance, so that's also there. But this is that thing that we sort of jumped up and down on in previous meetings, which is that, and I'll do it again here, this fund source, this RFQ, will provide one-time investments that will not persist beyond 2018. And so to the extent that somebody proposes to hire somebody who's desperately needed to start in October, this fund source will not provide funding come January 1st, 2019. It is not by its own terms allowed to do that. And so I just want to, there might be, and Marcy has pointed this out, and this might be Jean's question, there are all kinds of other ways to enhance programs that could totally be consistent with a one-time expenditure. And so I think that's sort of the spirit of what we're talking about here. But we really feel, as a matter of just responsibility to all the senior centers, that we just have to be excruciatingly clear that this RFQ will not provide funding for ongoing operations after its period of performance.
Leo, this is Lyle.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. This period of performance ends exactly when?
New Year's. 12/31. We will ring in the new year and ring out the period of performance all at once.
All right. Trying to get this clear in my head. Thanks.
Now, I do want to just put a little bit of nuance on here, is that you will notice in the RFQ that there is, particularly with respect to something like a capital investment, there is some language in there that basically acknowledges that something unforeseen might happen, that we can't invoice this project because of some delay, and it comes, we think that it's actually going to come in January 15th. And there is language that says we have the ability to discuss and negotiate particular situations that way. But just to be clear, that's going to be particular situations that way, and that's not going to be, we think we can get this done in July of next year. This is really, we proposed something to get done within the period of performance. Then life happened, as it sometimes does, and we think it's actually going to be closer to January 12th or something like that. Anything that you'd want to add there, Marcy? All right, so I think those are the investment areas. Any other questions on that? Please.
Just to clarify, at some point early on, when you started talking about this, you mentioned needing 50% of something. Could you say that again?
Yes. So this gets to the question, and Marcy's going to show some more detailed way to access it, but this gets to the question of once you fulfill or fill out your application, what happens to it? A panel is going to get it, and based on the criteria that are described within the RFQ for each of these questions, and there is an attachment that specifically says what the criteria are for each of these questions, that an application must score at least 50% in all of the categories in order to be eligible to receive funding. So that's where I'm saying the contents of the application matter. If upon reviewing those criteria for this category, somebody filled out an application and said, to build a roof, period. While clarity and concision are good skills, that is not likely to be at least 50% of the points response. And the criteria for each question are listed in the document that sort of describes those questions in detail.
Okay, I'm going to take over from here. Please feel free to take a break if you need, but time is running short, so I'm just going to plow ahead. You folks may have already familiarized yourself with the timeline for the RFP. It opened on the 4th. This is our first info session. Our next one will be on May 16th. I think that's a Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. This next one is important. So you've picked up the handouts, I presume. There's the eligibility criteria. The second one is the list of consultants, technical assistance consultants. There are 3 organizations, ALR Writing Services. Anna wasn't able to be here today. Emerging Design, Bonnie Olson, and Kevin, both you and Maura are associated. And if I understand correctly, you are able to be here till 4 o'clock or beyond to start having conversations with people, perhaps answering some questions?
Making contact. I don't know how many questions we can get, but we can give out our information to then be contacted to begin.
Okay, very good. And the third organization is Varenti Consulting, Catherine Varenti, and I know she's on vacation, but we have spent some time with all 3 consultants. They asked a lot of questions, gave us a lot of input, so they're experienced, and we encourage you to use them. It is a free resource to help you. No cost to the agency. Kevin.
Yeah, so if I may, just maybe to emphasize a couple of points. One, even though one of our associates, her organization has grant writing in it, we do not grant write for this process, right? We can help edit, we can review drafts, we can do that kind of thing, but we do not write for this process. The other thing is up there says a cutoff date of May 25th to contact us. We would ask that you pick an organization or who you want to work with and begin working with them as soon as possible all of us like to go through as many drafts as possible. I don't think that we would necessarily stand fast on that 25th. If it's the 26th, 27th, 28th, or something like that, and you have a question or you still need some help, please don't hesitate to contact us. The reason that's in there is to kind of say this is due June 7th, don't contact us on June 6th with, needing help with, all of that, because generally those who have been working with us over a period of time, we will still be working with them as well. Also, that this is, it's going to be accepted in Zoom grants, right? And I don't know if you all have had an opportunity to look at it yet. What we ask is that you start in a Word document and writing there and answering questions, because we don't have access to go in and look at each and every one of you all. If you start writing in Zoom grants, then it's very difficult for us to go in and see what's going on. So we ask that you start in a Word document, go into the Zoom grants, though, to see the character limit. That's very important, the character limit. Okay. So that's, we'll get into more of that later.
And just
the other question that I have is, when is the last day for questions? I don't know if I saw that.
good point. I believe we made it also May 25th. It says that somewhere in there. I can't put my finger on it right at the moment.
I have seen printed materials for the response due date of both 11:59 a.m. and 11:59 p.m. I think it would be helpful if you said it's either due by noon or midnight on that day, because there appears to have been an error made at least one place where somebody might be dependent on the wrong one. Which is it?
Good point. It is midnight. And just to clarify the question about technical assistance, the language in the RFP indicates that they could sit down and listen to your ideas about what you would like to propose, give you feedback on whether they believe it would fit within the categories that Leo has described. But it is correct. They will not then sit down. You will write your RFP, but they will give you feedback. They can give you editing assistance. But it is not a writing service, for lack of a better word. Okay. Last date, we just talked about June 7th midnight, and thank you for pointing that out. We will make that correction. Okay. How about a next slide? So I want to divide the remaining time into quickly reviewing the primary RFP packet, information in there, as well as Zoom grants. We are able to connect live with Zoom grants and walk you through it, how you sign in, what are the tabs you need to pay attention to. So let's see. This document is essentially, which is one of the handouts, is essentially a summary of this RFQ document. We've covered a lot of material already, but we can go through it. I've laid it out pretty much as an outline by page number. The general background, I think everyone is comfortable with here in the room. It talks about our future vision, which Leo has already addressed, about the inequities in the quality of life for some older adults, as well as the disparities in longevity rates across the county, the importance of social engagement, and the senior center's very important role in reducing social isolation and improving the health of older adults. Pages 10 through 12 essentially are the 4 investment areas which Leo went through in considerable detail, so I will skip that. We've also discussed the eligibility section. Page 13, there's information on the investment, the dollars available. It is a total of 3.7 million for senior centers across the county. We are not sure how many applicants we will have. We are guessing that the award level may be somewhere between 55 and 75,000 for the average applicant. It's a hunch. It's dependent on how many applications we receive and how responsive they are, I guess. There is language in there that you may ask for over $75,000, but you must prioritize in your narrative, which is questions 19 through 23. Which are your most important areas? What is your lowest priority for funding? In the event we do not have money to fund that, we need to know which area we could eliminate.
But you're required to have number one anyways, right? So you always would have to prioritize number one and number one?
There are two required questions, yes. Number 19 actually is a question about the background for your agency. King County has not funded a number of these senior center agencies. If we may have funded you at one time, but our general fund was so depleted that we are down to 150,000, as Leo has mentioned. So we would like some background information on your agency. That's question 19. How long have you been a senior center? How long ago? About how many people you serve, that kind of thing would be very helpful. That's a required question. There's no points associated with it, but it is helpful to us to learn more about who you are as an agency.
There's no point?
There are no points with 19. It's background. 20, there are points. 20.
In attachment 2, it does say that it's required and that 30 points are.
Okay, well, we need to sort that out. Attachment 2. Remind me which is attachment.
It's the breakout for the narrative and scope of work.
Oh, that's,
This is what you follow when you're trying to figure out what.
yeah. Does someone have a copy? Here you go. What page are you on? I have.
Yeah.
Page 2. Okay, I stand corrected. We did put points to that. Hey, correction, 19. Question 19 does have 30 points attached to it. Okay, good enough.
And just to provide some clarification there, the points there are sort of, you did it or you didn't. So one of the questions a lot of folks have asked is, are you going to be grading our applications based on the number of zip codes we serve, or the number of people, or the particular racial ethnic profile of our community? The answer to that is no. That question's points are associated with, did the senior center do the analysis, not what were the results of the analysis.
Could I ask again about your, if we were to say what our priorities are? In the draft RFQ, I thought that the county had said that enhanced programming was your lowest priority. Is that still the case?
So the question is, in a pre-final version of the RFQ, we had this phrase on that fourth category of what was then just called enhanced programming that said lowest priority. There is not a prioritization that we're imposing here, so that's why that phrase isn't there anymore. There's only one that you must do. You may do the others, but what animated that lowest priority that is still absolutely here is that this is not the RFQ to propose to fund the next 5 years of a social worker. And so it's not really a question of priority, as we had sort of previously and frankly inaccurately sort of phrased it. It's really just, I said jumping up and down. It's really just, again, jumping up and down. This is not your ongoing funding source. This is a one-time investment funding source.
Yeah, and I guess I can see why you would have a point system on 19, because you're asking, does your staff have senior experience? Do you know what you're doing? If we're going to have you become a hub, have you ever been financially audited? I mean, to me, it just makes sense. Are you who you say what you're doing, and can we trust you to become our emissary? So I think it just makes sense.
Thank you. Okay. There's no more questions. Page 14 of the document talks about data resources. Some of you attended a previous session, and we showed you an interactive map of King County with zip codes, and you could click on it and get information about race, ethnicity, age groups of older adults. Well, we got a lot of feedback on that.
And you haven't heard all of it.
Oh, probably not. But what it did inspire us to do was take the data behind the maps that was all in Excel and create one large Excel spreadsheet. So that is attachment 5, zip code demographic table. And it has essentially all the zip codes in King County across the top, and along the left-hand margin, then all the different categories of data that we're looking for.
It is very interesting.
We were really pleased and appreciated the help of our evaluation unit in gathering that information, and we will use those maps on our website or someplace else. They actually are still available. They are attachment 11. As you know, the various senior centers are represented by dots on that King County map, as well as the small nutrition sites. So if you are wondering what nutrition sites might be in your neighborhood, move your cursor around and you will be able to locate them. The last map.
If we have specific questions regarding our area, would that be better suited for after the meeting or perhaps on Monday?
Is this a question about how to determine your zip code? Why don't we talk about it, because someone else may have that a very similar question.
So if I superimpose the map that's on attachment 11 by zip code, it coincides. But if I go by actual county line, it doesn't. So I guess I'm curious, how did you come up with this? How did you come up with the maps that you did?
We may need to do some research and get back to you on that. If I understand the question, somehow the maps don't match. Is that what you're?
Greenwater and Crystal Mountain have a 98022 zip code, but they are in Pierce County.
So as Jabina points out, and folks who love stats will know, zip codes do not conform to county boundaries. And so in preparing the zip code map, you are going to capture, as a demographic matter, people who are outside of King County. So that's just true. And I think, frankly, we're aware that there are people who go to senior centers in King County that are not living in King County. But so what you point out is completely accurate. It is not of concern to us in the application that you attempt to sort of prorate a particular zip code's people based on what percentage of them are in King County and out of King County.
I think it matters to me, like, oh my gosh, I need to offer programs up at Crystal Mountain. Oh, they're not in this county. And I think it may change some of the numbers on attachment 5.
I think that's exactly the place to go. Just to say it, this is a King County funding source, and it is for King County residents. And so we would not fund something that would go up to a Snohomish or a Pierce County place, just to be clear about that. Not that we don't fantastically love, our regional partners.
And it did kind of raise my panic level about this incredibly large area that was in my service.
Yes. But the thing to point out, as Marcy was saying, is that we are not going to take a look at the application from a particular senior center and say, gosh, they only serve 10 people in King County, and these guys serve 5,000 people in King County. Therefore, the 5,000 people in King County application is stronger. That's not what this information is being used for. It's really, we're kind of hoping for what Claire did, which is just like, I didn't know that about my area. It's just meant to be information provision to you all to inform your analysis about what types of communities you might choose to try to increase inclusion of, but it's not going to be a rated part of the application.
I just thought I was learning a whole lot of new things about my service. And it was panicking me a little
Yes,
bit. So.
it is meant to be a self-reflective process. Learn about your service area. You may want to reach out to certain groups. It may help you organize your thinking about how you want to proceed and what you want to request in terms of funding.
Thank you.
So the last map, attachment 12, is just a map of county regions. There are questions on there about, do I provide services in East Rural King County or North King County? And that will help you identify what region you serve if you have questions about that. Okay. Page 15, there is a discussion about data collection and reporting. Every senior center will be required to provide King County with an unduplicated participant count. There is an attachment 7 that provides a sample form that you will be using, or if you have a spreadsheet that is able to provide the same information, that may be negotiated with us. That's up to our evaluation unit, whether they are able to grab that data for our reporting purposes to the county council. Yes.
I have a question about who it is we're reporting on that. So a lot of us already report unduplicated count in aggregate way on our regular senior contracts. The numbers, the people that we report on this one, I assume they're completely different people from who we're reporting on our regular one? No. No? No.
So you have to start at a different period. Start in January.
Yeah. Well, like a regular.
So there's a question. The question is, if I already report to the city of Seattle, I'm assuming, on your unduplicated, then is there another report required for King County? Yes. Is it on the same people? Yeah.
Okay, that's right.
We're not asking you to separate out who you serve by fund source.
And I just want to echo what Jeannie said, because I think that, it is the same people. I mean, the people you serve, that's the total number of people you serve. But as Jeannie mentioned, you might have to start your counts at different points. So we might be July through December of 2018, but your other King County contract might be January through December, and you would have to be able to split those out, but there is not an expectation that you would. It is totally okay to count the same people, and that might not be the case in future RFPs, depending on the way it works, but that's what we're doing right now.
Okay, the last item I want to mention under data reporting is that at the end of the year, there will be a narrative report, which we will be requesting. What did you do? What were you able to accomplish with the funding that you received?
There'll be a format for that?
Yes, it will come out at the end of the year, and you'll have after December 31st to provide it to us. Timeline, we've already.
I just had a request, which is, if this one is going from July through December, that just for the sake of the way the database works and the way that the city contracts start in January and go to December, and we're set up to count starting in January, that it would be great if the future ones, should they happen for the next 5 years, had that calendar rather than one starting in July 1st.
So essentially the request was that we, from here on out, after this RFP period is over, that for 2019 and beyond that we request the data yearly. January.
This is really part of the database to start unduplicating again after the first year if it's set up to do it the other way.
Okay. Timeline, we have gone over page 15, 16. Page 16 provides a little bit of information about your proposal requirements. I have mentioned that the primary questions are 19 through 23. Those questions, 2 are required, others are optional. And as Kevin has wisely pointed out, and I will reinforce, for those questions, it is 6,000 characters. And if you are creating it in Word, as he has suggested, if you go under Review, Word Count, it will tell you how many characters are there. So I encourage you to test often to see where you're at, so that you don't end up putting something in Zoom Grants and finding it cut off my most important paragraph. So, technical assistance we've discussed. A review of proposals, I will just mention that we are developing a multidisciplinary review committee to assist us in evaluating these all the proposals that we get and making recommendations of who we should file. The final decision, of course, is going to lie with our department director, but that is our typical RFP, RFQ process. Last item on that document is a list of our department's insurance requirements. It's kind of detailed. I will let you review that on your own. Next slide, please. Okay, how many people have successfully gotten onto Zoom Grants? Okay, that's a good number there. I encourage you to get on and check it out. It takes a little bit of time to figure out how to maneuver through it. You may answer questions as soon as you enter information. Marcy Senior Center, and then I click out of the little box that it's provided. You will see Save flash before you. You know that your material has been saved. If I enter that information and Save is blinking and blinking and blinking, it is not saving. You may as well click away from that, work on something else, come back and enter that information again. Just a tip about Zoom Grants. If it flashes Save, you're good. If it sits there and thinks about it, it's not liking something about what you entered. It's too long, it's got characters in it that shouldn't be there, something like that.
I just have a question about characters, because we are these people, and if we had something in these characters, that probably not be
I would try it. I don't think it depends on where you are putting it. If you're uploading something, there is an upload document section. If you're uploading it to I would think that that would be fine. It's possible in some other areas it might not. So this is the Zoom grant link that was emailed out to you. An easier way to get that would be to connect with our website at King County, kingcounty.gov/VSHSL, Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services Levy. And that will take you to the next page. You'll scroll down and you will see Senior Center release. I have to say, Adam did a great job in creating this website. So he has very conveniently created a spot here where you can click on it, get to quite a bit of information that kind of summarizes a lot of what we've talked about today. And it will also get you to click here to connect to Zoom grants. So that's an easy way to connect. And again, I encourage you to connect to Zoom grants sooner than later. Okay, next slide, please. So let's assume we took that route. We are now connected to Zoom grants. We are interested in applying or perhaps previewing just at the moment, either one. Email, create your own password, your first and last name. And you then click create new account, and there you are. You're ready to go.
If you have more than one person who is going to be accessing Zoom grants to put pieces in, should they have different or the same username and password?
The question is, if there's two people from my agency, two or more people from my agency working in Zoom grants, do I need to create a separate account? And it looks like Kevin has some information for us.
Yes, I would not suggest that. My suggestion would be to create a master Word document that then, once complete and reviewed, that then one person can then go in and cut and paste into Zoom grants. This is not a process that you really want to take any chances with, right? Because inevitably, you know, those chances always come at the last minute, at the last hour, and then, right, so.
The reason I ask that because it does ask the first and last name. So presumably the person who has either the only or the majority access would be that. Okay.
Yeah, so the question was, would it be then the primary person answering the questions to the RFQ that would have the account? And that, I would say yes, that makes sense. Kevin, more thoughts?
Well, I was going to say, I don't know if you use Google Docs or anything like that in the past, right? But that can be, you know, a process in which multiple people from different locations can work on the same thing.
And I will add that there are questions in Zoom grants that are short answer questions, where how many older adults from 54 to 59 are in my service area? That may be something that someone can quickly enter, but your answers to your questions, 19 through 23, you will want to do in Word so that you can do your character count on it and be sure you are comfortable with that document before you paste it into Zoom grants. Okay, next slide. Okay. We may want to go live to Zoom grants too,
Okay.
if we can.
Absolutely.
Essentially, this is where you will be led once you have signed in to Zoom grant. It's kind of the introductory page here.
There's the VSHSL website. Zoom grant should be there. And I'll open in a new page for us. All right.
Okay. So we were just on the open program page that's up in the upper left. The next tab request for qualifications described. So this is a short summary of the information we have been over, a little bit about the levy, the 4 areas of investment, our long-term vision to develop senior centers into hubs, and the amount of funding available. If you can hide it if you want to. And I think to open it back up, I think you have to hit that tab. Yeah. Okay, so we'll scroll down. You'll see the eligibility criteria and technical assistance information, which we just supply. This is a very important section of Zoom grants. This is called the library section. It has at the top, the document which we just reviewed. You can open it, download, print it, and it has all of the attachments that we have been referring to, which I know can be a little confusing while you're sitting there and you don't have that list in front of you. So we have attachment 1, which is the free technical assistance. You have that handout. Narrative scope of work is going to be an important one. That was the one that lists which ones you have points associated with. There is a checklist. So the last handout, which I really haven't mentioned, is essentially an outline of the tabs that you will see across the top. Right now we're under the tab of request for qualification. Could you scroll up for a moment, please? Request for qualifications, but under that we've included the eligibility requirements, technical assistance, and we're at the library now. So the page 1 of the attachment 3, Zoom grants outline and application checklist, summarizes the information under each of those 5 tabs across the top. So we scroll down. I'll let you explore the attachment section in the library, but you will find all of them there. As you scroll down this page, it will begin to ask you some questions about your organization. How much you may not have the answer to this right away. What is my total request? That's something you can fill in later. Your applicant, your name, first name, last name, telephone, email, your contact information. Who would we contact about this application? Okay. And any additional contacts for this application. This next button is very important. The only way to get to the rest of the tabs is by hitting that.
Do I have to have an account set up?
Yeah, you don't have an account.
Oh, here we go. This takes us to the next section there.
Okay, so the next section is essentially the information that's on page 2 of the outline and applicant checklist. So we have a summary tab with basic agency information, 4-sentence summary of your project. Maybe list your 4 investment areas or whatever investment areas you choose. Are you a nonprofit, for-profit, that kind of information. Your EIN number, your business license number. And here's where you're going to tell us how many hours a week do you serve seniors? And how many days of the week are meals provided? So that's where you're going to be documenting that you are meeting the eligibility requirements. a place for you to check your services, the qualified senior programming, whether you are an agency that provides services at multiple nutrition services at multiple senior centers. And then here's where you are entering your demographic data that you will obtain from estimating your zip code services areas and the numbers in these different categories. Here's your 4-sentence description of what you're proposing. A question about what are the zip codes that you believe will serve. And there are some specific instructions about putting a space between the zip code and the percent that you think you would serve, followed by a comma. And that's from our Zoom grant data person who said, in order for us to create a report that might be useful to King County, we need it set up in that manner.
The zip code doesn't identify the name of the neighborhood. Can you put that in parentheses before we get to the next comma?
No. I think we need to stay exactly with this format that the IT person has specified. Otherwise, we won't be able to draw it. Here's where you identify any small nutrition sites in your area, more demographic information that you're going to get from the table. Was there a question on the phone? Any questions?
Can I go back to the checklist?
Yes.
So number 4, demographics, racial / ethnic table group list. Last is
oh, no, there's a little. Let's scroll down and see what we have.
I think the thing to know is that Marcy put together a checklist I think is helpful in sort of navigating. At the end of the day, you got to fill out all the questions on the application, except for the ones that are noted as optional. And that becomes your application. So all the paper goes away. You either filled it out or you didn't. And what Marcy did is just recognizing that many folks might not be familiar with Zoom grants, that Zoom grants is a thing that you need to spend a little bit of time in, because there are those like next button things that Marcy's identified. But I think the key point here is it's laid out in a really sort of linear way within Zoom grants, and that is the application. It is not a piece of paper that you'll produce. It's not answers that you'll provide in any other format. If it's not in here, it is not anywhere.
So there was a question about, I would like to explain what neighborhoods I serve. There is a box where you can enter that information. And it is here questions 19 through 23 where you will need to refer to attachment 2 because it provides additional information which would not fit in Zoom grants. We were too wordy to fit it in.
Under zip codes, if we have slight overlap between, let's say, Black Diamond and Auburn and Enumclaw, and it's under 5%, do you still want us to specify that, or?
I would, if it's a part of your service area, I'd include it.
Okay, thank you.
Question regarding zip code again. If we don't have any clients on the certain zip code, we don't have to indicate that there, right?
The question was, if I don't have anybody in zip code X, do I need to indicate that? No, you are only entering information, entering the zip codes that you anticipate are part of your service area and the number that you estimate. Yes.
Does that include being on the border kind of federal way? Do you say not to include Jersey County zip codes, but include some of those if those are service areas.
You will not find, the question was, what if we're on the border of King County and with another county? Do I include zip codes from that county? No, you do not. We're only interested in King County service areas. Yes.
On the ages, I was noticing that it says 55 plus, and then it says, so is that the total number of people?
Yes.
And then it's broken down after
Question,
that?
yes, there's a question, there's a blank for how many older adults in the service area over 55 and older. And there is a spot on the spreadsheet that gives you the total 55 and older. That is the number we're looking for there.
You do 55 and older, and then you divide that
And
up
then,
by the
and then
different-
you would look down the spreadsheet to find the data. Okay, let's move down. Low income.
Question is just a follow-up on the demographic question. Is that question to say, just to list the demographics of those that you serve, or those that you have intention of serving and maybe partnering with to serve?
There is a question about the number of individuals by race, ethnicity, if you know that for 2017, for the last year, there is a spot for you to enter that information.
That you serve.
Past tense, yes, in 2017. And then the rest of the questions, demographic questions, are about your service area. Who could you potentially serve if you had resources to do that?
Just an FYI, I'm sure, but some of our other funders, one of whom is represented by, have asked us to report on income based on the HUD values, not on the other. Some of us are going to have to refigure our numbers.
Okay, the comment was that City of Seattle, if I may say so, uses HUD definition of low income, and we are using census data, official census data. And this is not something you're reporting on, you're just looking at the spreadsheet that we have provided to gather those numbers on those anticipated zip code areas. It should help inform you about your service area. That is the intent of this exercise. Right. Okay. Low income, and we have some percents by zip code of English as a second language, essentially. Other additional categories, LGBTQ, you can enter other groups if you know them. We have data on only major race ethnic groups. You may have other communities that you know of in your service area. This would be a good place to indicate.
So I'm a little confused about service area. I mean, we run a food bank, and there are specific zip codes that we serve for that. We have a senior center in downtown Seattle, but we don't exclude people from other places. So the service area for us is whatever. So if I'm putting down what potential is for, I mean, it's sort of indefinite and enormous. So I'm not quite sure what we're trying to get at there.
So what is your best guess? So the question is, you know, we could serve all of King County perhaps.
Yeah.
And what are you looking for? And the answer is that it's your best estimate of who you primarily serve. What is your primary zip code area from which you draw participants?
So not what our potential is, but what we are currently drawing from that.
Right. So I'm assuming where your food bank serves is probably an area where you draw participants. If you have data from last year by zip code,
Yeah, I know who we serve, but the
Okay,
potential.
so then
I was
that may
confused
be
by
an easy
potential.
way for you to think about. So if you do have data from prior years, and you know the zip codes of your participants, you can maybe able to analyze that and say, well, about 25% come from this zip code, maybe 5% from that. That's a good guess on your estimated service area. Do you have some thoughts?
The only thing I'll add is again, you could list 1 zip code or 9 zip codes, and it doesn't affect the score of your application, so just say that. And what you can really think of this as is nobody funds all the senior centers in King County right now. And actually, nobody really knows how they all fit together. But we do know that in some cases they overlap, in some cases they don't. And so what this is helping us to do is to, at a county level, begin to build that profile. Because what if no senior center lists 98144? Then I think just as an organization, we say, gosh, like we should probably do something not within this RFQ for the older adults in 98144. And so it's, what Marcy's describing is right on. This is really, how would you define your area of operations or the place that you think that you serve, your community, and however you define it is not going to affect your application as long as you define it some way. And what it's going to allow us to do is just to really begin to increase our understanding of where there's really heavy coverage, where there's light coverage, where folks, where we have really significant racial or ethnic populations, and how does that map onto disparities? And maybe there's not a senior center that claims that area right now, and is that a discussion that we should have with other folks about, can we ask a senior center in the future to take a look at that area, or is there another type of program? So this is information gathering that we are doing through this application as we begin to provide these services in partnership with you all.
And Kevin,
Yes,
comment?
Just to clarify, because I think when I read through everything, my thinking was that we know that there's some senior citizens, senior centers that not serving as many populations as they could, right? And that this is an opportunity to look in your service area to see what populations are in the service area that you could potentially reach out to then begin to service. And perhaps a way of doing that is through partnering with some of the nutrition centers to say that here's a population within our zip code that we can possibly serve to broaden our diversity base. And here's a partnership that we could use, to potentially accomplish that. Is that sort of the?
I mean, that's the overall. That's absolutely the overall intent. I guess the last thing I'll say is don't make it more than it is. In some ways, it's saying, which zip codes do you think you serve? And there's no wrong answer, except that you put a good faith answer into the application. Mm-hmm. And we're not going to say, Jeannie, you're wrong. Because I know a senior center, I know a senior from 98144 went to yours. Like, that's not what this is about at all. It's just, how do you describe your area?
So I guess when you're like the racial percentages that you are up there, the ethnicity, it sounded like you were not interested in that. That's what we did last year, not what our potential is.
That's if you know.
Yeah, we've got all that.
Okay.
But I'm sorry. I thought that was like we were supposed to look at the map and see what our area was, but I totally see how I could take the information that you have from the map that shows downtown Seattle and contrast it with what we're doing. But what we're putting in there is our information, and then somewhere else we're putting in the.
Exactly. Yes. There's a question about 2017. If you have that information, then there are a whole series of questions based on the data spreadsheet that we provided. Okay. Yeah. We are closing in on 4 o'clock. So I would like to be able to scroll through and just familiarize you with the tab. Would that be useful, or do you have questions?
Yes, that would be useful.
Okay, let us go to the bottom of this page. There's questions 19 through 23 that are 6,000 characters each.
Those are the important.
Those are the important ones. Scroll down. There's your next button. Okay, so we are at, there are some, let's see, under budget. So you're in the budget section. There are 4 items under there, which you will need to answer. There you are indicating your requests by the 4 investment areas. And there's a line for your incentive, inclusion incentive, if you choose that option. The next one down is capital expense. So if you've got a capital project, a construction type thing, you can enter it there. Scroll down, in the budget narrative section, where you will describe very briefly.
Is that limited to
Yes. Here it's got, under each box, it seems to tell you how many characters.
matching required?
Matching is, the question is, do we need to have matching funds? And the answer.
Other funding.
The other funding. So it is possible that you want to request $49,999 and you want to partner with some other funding you have from United Way. And to do that, that is something you can propose in your application, but we are requesting a letter of commitment from that other entity. So this would be a good place where you could enter for your capital project. United Way is giving us 20,000 and I want 49.
What if we don't have that score that's going to be?
We can update that other funding, if any. It's not necessary.
Yeah.
But it's not required.
No, it is not required. That question in the.
I have a grant, foundation that gave us $5,000 towards this project. That's really more of a $16,000. I've been hunting for money and I'm hoping to use this now to fill that gap. They have requirement that it had to be spent by May 31st. I just wrote them a letter saying, golly gee, can you just hang on for another month? Because it's a foundation, your ability to really communicate with them, it's like, you hope that you get some reply, but there's no telephone number, whether somebody would ever actually respond. I'm concerned about your letter of commitment. I have a letter of commitment from last year saying we'll spend $5,000 on to make it very fast and handicap accessible. I don't.
If a funding period for your other source ends before this starts, then you would not be able to provide a letter of commitment, I would
They
assume.
absolutely must provide that letter. So I will, I don't know, find them in a dark alley somewhere. Okay, thank you.
I can also offer that a $16,000 bathroom modification is an eligible amount and purpose.
You could just
I know, but I have $5,000 committed and I'm just hoping to apply it, you know.
Okay.
Is a copy of an award
Yes.
letter? Yes. Is a copy of an award letter for a project sufficient?
I would think that would suffice. So if we scroll down and hit next, then we are at questions in table format. There are 3 there. Here's where you would list any nutrition sites you're going to partner with. Next is, there was some demographic information that we are asking that our IT person at Zoom Grants was not able to put in the body of in the same section as the other questions. And it is noted in the question area that you need to go to this tab and fill out this chart. And it even asks you to check that, yes, I have come to this tab and I have completed this section. So just know that at some point, some of the data on that spreadsheet, you will go to this tab to enter. So you would, here it's just asking which race, ethnic groups, and name of tribes. Again, we would like to know a little bit about your staff. Are you a one-person shop, 1.5 FTE? This would be helpful information for us. Next tab. Upload documents. So if you're proposing a partnership with a small nutrition site, you need to document that nutrition site is interested in partnering with you. And this is where you would upload a document. So there is a monthly calendar of activities that's required. We'll upload it here. Capital project plan. If you've got a letter of commitment, that's the next one down, and your letter of partnership with a small nutrition site is the third. And if you do have a capital project and have an estimate from a contractor, you can upload it there if it will help provide us with information that may help us make a decision, or the review panel, I should say. And that's it.
A question. That's the activity center activity calendar. That's the current one or projected one when we start the funding? Or partnership? Or enhance the program?
So what is you must qualify now as a senior center. Okay. So what is your current activity schedule?
Okay.
Okay. You have now walked through Zoom grants. Yay! In a very short period of time.
One more question, going back to the full-time employees, things like that. I work at a community center, but I'm the only one who does the senior programming out of that center. So just mean that you're asking information on.
Yes. All right. The question is, if I'm a community center and there's multiple staff there, do I want to know all, do we want to know about all that staff or just those associated with the senior programming? And that would be just the senior programming.
Which includes our finance person, our executive director, and all those people that are connected.
If so, the question is, would that include accountant, fiscal people,
Leadership?
Administrative support? It would probably not be a full FTE in that situation, but if you have that information on, quarter time, something like that, that would be useful. Questions?
Question on points. So you say for some of the questions, as long as you answer it, you get the full points, right? But
take a look at the criteria. So there's that I think it's attachment 2 that sort of guides you through each of those questions that has a substantive point attached to it. And then it lists in bullet form 4 to 6 or 7. These are how the points will be assessed. But when you take a look at those, in some of them it says how well does it describe, and then some of them are did they.
Okay. Other questions? Yes.
Under insurance for Wilton, I know we talked about audit subject to have to show that in the second quarter. Is that correct? From July to December for insurance billing?
So the question was, for insurance purposes, do we need to demonstrate just that we have the appropriate insurance for that 6-month period of time?
Correct.
And that would be correct. Just.
So sorry, our insurance will renew on June 6th. So last year and how that worked. All right. I mean, I sort of.
You will, so the question is, if my insurance lapses on June 6th, is that good enough evidence yes, for this application. Of course, if you are awarded funds, you would need to update your insurance then. Any other questions? One more. Kate?
Well, I'm just, the small nutrition sites.
Yes.
I just want to clarify something. They cannot apply for funding without being sponsored sort of by a partnership with a bona fide senior center per the descriptions. Is there an opportunity for the people on that list that are interested to, say that they're interested and want to partner with a senior? I mean, is there a process for that?
The question is, essentially, how do you connect to these small?
Or that they are interested, that they're expressing an interest and would like to partner with a senior center to develop a program or whatever.
Good question. We did include all of those nutrition sites, small nutrition sites, in the invitation for this meeting as well as next week's meeting. So they are aware of it. I've spoken to a couple of them. If you are interested, I would reach out to them.
And the last thing I'll say is it's a little bit of an experiment. We know that senior centers writ large, some of them do very well with inclusiveness and some of them don't. And we know that you could do it in an inauthentic way that wouldn't really work that well. And so on a short RFP, this is an experiment. Like, can we figure out a way to solve this issue of building these partnerships that we're really hoping we can have across the county? But it's a little bit of an experiment.
And it would be like a pilot that you would work out with them to see, because
what is the outcome you want?
What's that?
What kind of outcome you are expecting
with
the partnership?
This is a really good question, and take a look at what the RFP asks for or the RFQ asks for doesn't. We're asking for the description of the partnership itself. So there's not a lot of we held 19 meetings. We're really saying an authentic relationship is going to be the product of those two groups deciding what they should do together and describe that to us. But it is not there's not a lot of requirement there other than that you describe how you'll partner and that both entities agree to that in a letter. But there's not a lot of specific requirements outside of that.
And would that partnership end the December 9th?
We are funding the coming together of the two groups. I think it would certainly not be within the intent that, you were only working together because there was money.
But if
Sometimes it's the only way you
small
can.
site required the $15,000 in order to be where they are in that Line Community Center, right, Line Senior Program. I don't imagine that the city would be giving that $15,000 for the following year.
No. And so I think this really gets at, one-time funding, as you're mentioning right now, and the type of partnership that you might choose to establish with one of these small nutrition sites probably should not be a rent-sharing one. This is hey, how can we spend some money and bring our membership together once or twice? And nobody has to apply for it. You could say, that doesn't fit our situation. We're not going to ask for the extra $15,000 to do this. What we're saying is that we do know that we're not doing a good enough job as a county of including and bringing together the full diversity of seniors. And this is an experiment to see if we can do better there.
Kevin?
Is that part of your strategy moving forward with the new funding for seniors in the levy to fund partnerships, right? So is this a mechanism to begin that process that can then weigh heavier on when your new strategies roll out for 2019 and beyond?
It is potentially. So in the very beginning, we said two kinds of connections. Connect people to each other and connect programs in ways that make them more effective. The connecting programs we can actually do. We know how to do that. Making people connect is super hard. And you guys do it really well for the folks who come to your senior centers now. And this is just, again, us saying, we have groups of seniors who don't use the senior centers. And as we make the policy choice to fund senior centers as hubs, we've got a real responsibility to make sure that those hubs are accessible and inclusive to the full diversity of the county. So it's absolutely part of a longer-term strategy, but it's also a recognition that we can't say, increase the number of Latino seniors at your senior center by 5%. Because it doesn't work that way. Particularly within 6 months. It's got to be a relationship. And so to your question, the reason for funding it in this way is just to say, we actually don't know what it looks like, but we know it needs to happen, and we recognize that it might do better with some resources behind it, even if it's on a short-term period. And again, nobody might apply for it. We can't control that, but we hope that somebody will try it, and that we'll learn from that, to Kevin's point, and continue to develop ways to get better and better at making senior centers as inclusive as they can be, which is not the same as saying they're not inclusive now, but as inclusive as they can be.
Any other questions?
We're sort of running out of time, and I just had only one agenda item to do today, which was to say thank you for a couple of things. One of them was the data that you're required to be reporting to us. I've never seen any quite so new. I've certainly seen this kind of data many times over the years, but this is perfect, and I wanted to thank you for that. The other piece I wanted to thank you about was the idea of the partnership and the additional funding. We had some who's behind us that's already contacted us and asked if we be around this because we're one of the sites that has some of that funding. And so these questions about who would ask for the additional funding and so on, there are those questions for us.
Thank you.
So I'll just say one last thing is $3.7 million of new money that the county has chosen to levy taxes on itself for, to build up what you all do. And it's possible to get lost in the sort of intricacies of the application and forget that this is new funding to do the things that you, and you're probably not going to run into too many RFQs that are this adaptable to the particular senior center and community. And so we're really excited about this.
So are we.
And we really look forward to working with you all on this. So.
Thank you all for being here. And Kevin and Maura, can you stick around for a few more minutes in the event people would like to connect with you? Thank you again. One last comment I will make is there is a contact admin tab you will see, and it is where you submit written questions to us. It comes right to me, actually. You'll see an email to Marcy Kubbs pop up. You ask your question, and then I will answer it in the frequently asked questions document, and a notice will go out that that's been updated.
Okay. Up until the 25th.
Up until the 25th of May. Yes, thank you very much.